Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of TDA Talks. I'm Kim Wardle, EVP of Design and Innovation Partnerships at TDA, the talent agency that connects leading tech, product, and design talent with some of the most forward-thinking teams in the world. Now, if you're joining for the first time, welcome. This podcast is our way of shining a light on bold ideas, fresh perspectives, and real stories from some of the most inspiring voices shaping the industry today. Now, today's guest is someone very special, a longtime TDA partner and friend. And you might have joined one of our leadership events, actually, that she's facilitated in New York. Or if you're lucky, had her as your coach during your own design leadership journey. Now, I'm thrilled to welcome leadership and exec coach Teresa Brazen.
Hey, I'm so happy to be here, Kim.
I know, it's so good to
Yeah,
see you.
you
Thank
too.
you.
Always.
Now, in today's world where emerging technologies, team restructures, and shifting strategies seem to move faster than most of us can keep up with, what does it really take to lead through the unknown without losing your people or your purpose? And today, Teresa will share her insights on how leaders can navigate change with clarity, courage, curiosity, even when the path ahead feels unclear. Drawing in on years of experience working with product design and engineering leaders, she's kindly going to share actionable insights, honest reflections, and a human first approach to leadership during those times of uncertainty. So, whether you're facing AI integration, a tough reorg, or simply trying to keep your team engaged through another wave of change, I promise you this conversation is for you. Now, without further ado, I'm going to dive in with the first question. Teresa, let's start with the messy middle. What's one moment in your career where you had to lead through a big change? Before you yourself felt ready, what did you learn?
Mm. Um, there are two instances that come to mind. It's a good question too, because change is inevitable. And I think right now, what leaders are feeling is that it's just like one change on top of the other. And that's not going to stop anytime soon. So figuring out how to grapple with this is super important. So for me, one, there's okay. So first of all, I used to run Cooper Professional Education, which was a leading training service for people in the design industry, working professionals, and focused on design leadership and design skills. And so that organization, we were acquired. There were a bunch of things that happened. And basically, I had a mandate to scale Cooper Professional Education globally to a bunch of different design consulting offices around the world. And those studios they didn't train people in design or design leadership. They hadn't sold it as a service before. And so we were tasked with helping, basically 10 offices around the world figure out, how to do what we were doing because we were a pretty successful part of the business. And I had never scaled a business before, right? And nobody on my team had done it either. So, that was a big change. It was a big positive change, but it was a big change that I didn't entirely feel ready for. And I have always, well, not always. I mean, my own leadership journey has been a journey, but definitely more recently in my career, thought of leadership as a team sport. Not something that I am doing by myself, right? Like I know that when I leverage the leadership potential of people around me, I do better. The whole team does better. So, in that instance, I thought about how can we collectively own this change, right? And so, the big thing was thinking about who could own what and really empowering them to do it, right? So there was a ton that we had to do. We created a business playbook to teach all these other offices, like how to operate our kind of business. We had a teaching playbook to teach them how to teach. We had to refresh all of our products. We went through a huge rebrand, or actually created a brand for our part of the business. Website, redesign, like there were tons of parts. And so I identified who I thought could really own and run with those parts of the change. So that was one piece. And then figuring out like, where should I focus? Right. Where do and for me, that was building relationships with the studio leads and other offices, focusing on the rebrand. And I think, one thing that was a real through thread for us that helped us through, figure out how to evolve is we had a really clear mission. And I shared it often in meetings. We'd start with like our mission slide, like, what are we about? And that was an anchor for us as we tried to figure out like, how do we help all these other people become a part of what we are about? So, I'd never done it before. It wasn't all perfect. One mistake I made is I kept ownership of the website redesign, which I really shouldn't have done, and that wasn't my area of expertise, and we suffered because of it. So that was a lesson learned.
Yeah.
And it was really hard for me to give up certain parts of the work too. Like I didn't own the teacher training and the product redesign, and that's the stuff that's like near and dear to my heart. But I had somebody amazing, this woman, Holly Thorson, who's really good at it. And so I had to give up that part, which I think a lot of leaders can empathize with.
Yeah.
So, that's a story of just, I would say, a change that was welcome and invited and excited. But I also think about another one, which was not welcome, which was the pandemic. And I was running my team. The training that we did, was almost entirely in person. And it was really powerful because it was in person.
Yeah.
So when the pandemic happened, I mean, it literally was like there was like a month or a few like weeks, right, where things started changing really rapidly. And you have to remember at that time, we didn't know if you would die if you were in the same room with another person, right? And so I really grappled with, how do I lead my team through this? Like there were these two pieces, right? There was, how do I protect my team? How do I protect our clients? And then also, how do I keep my team employed, right? So I was thinking about when do I call it and say, my team can't get on airplanes anymore, right? Or when do I call it and say, we're not doing in-person training anymore? Our entire business, almost entire business, is all based on in-person training. But when do I make that call? And knowing that it was not a time where I wanted people to end up out in the market looking for work.
Yeah.
Like I was worried about them. I was worried for me. I was worried for everybody. And that also was another time I think we were, really connected around the mission of our work. So it was easy for me to empower certain people to run with, like, how do we shift to remote training, right? Because I knew like we were all on the same page about what we were trying to do together.
Yeah.
But it was really hard. And I think one thing I learned from that was, I knew this intellectually, but I hadn't been through it emotionally, right? Is that the kind of leadership that you have to exhibit in times of, I wouldn't say calm, but normal times, let's call it that, versus times where there's an extreme and sudden change are different. Like you really have to show up differently, right? And I would say in the latter, like extreme decisiveness, clarity of roles, clarity of communications. Here's what we're doing. Here's who owns it, and so I had taught for years about the importance of expanding your leadership range, right? Being able to flex for different circumstances with different people. But that was an experience where I was forced to expand my own range. And I think, one thing I wish that I had done differently, or that I learned from, and it's actually something that I when I'm working with my own clients, I remind them of, or help them think about, is it would have been good if we had had a moment together where I said, okay, let me get the team together and let's just talk about, who do we want to be through this time?
Yeah.
How do we want to look back at ourselves as a team and the work that we're doing? And so that we could, and also figuring out like, what are our operating principles right now? How should they be different than the way that we were operating before? I'm a big advocate for reflection and intentionality. I had tried to help leaders get out of reactivity. But that was a time that was really easy to be reactive.
Yeah.
So those are two examples that come to mind for me.
Yeah, amazing. And at that time as well, it's actually funny when you think about it now because video was so new. It was so strange. So it must have been crazy for you guys going from, like you said, in-person training to having to do it online as well. I guess that was another hurdle you would have had to face. Um,
Yeah.
it's crazy. And you've talked a lot about inside out leadership, and
Mm.
you've actually spoke about it a lot in some of our roundtables that we've done together. But what does that mean? Like, especially in the context of fast moving, high pressure change, why start inside?
Yeah. Actually did an op-ed with another woman on in Inc. magazine about this. So if people are
Ah,
interested,
mhm.
there's like a much more in-depth, or there is an in-depth article about it. But so inside out leadership is basically an approach where you are very intentional as a leader about aligning who you are inside with how you present yourself to the world. So, and the reason that's important is because when those two things align, um, I'll call it your internal personal, leadership versus your external leadership, you are able to navigate changes and challenges with a lot more power and purpose. And it's an approach to leadership that's really about putting self-awareness and personal growth at the heart of management. So I'll give you an example of what the opposite is, right? So I had a client who, amazing human being, had gotten some negative feedback about their leadership, and so we were working on that. And one of the issues that we realized is that they had a boss who had a certain style of leadership that was very different from their own, and they were mimicking that person's leadership approach. And it actually was not really aligned with who they were, their natural style of leadership. So, their boss was very, well, I don't need to get into the details, but basically there was a real mismatch. And this person spent a lot of calories and energy sort of trying to model that way because that's what they saw as an example. And when we worked on helping that person figure out what was their natural leadership style and really work on that and expanding their range too, they were some of the issues that they were running into sort of went away, right? Like people were much more receptive to them. They were building better partnerships. And so, but basically, when you are really clear about who you are and what you're about, and your belief and philosophy about leadership, and then you practice that, right? So the inside and outside match, you're incredibly powerful because you're not spending calories trying to be something you're not.
Yeah.
And I think what's important about that approach, especially in times that are really uncertain, is that there's an element of this that's about focusing on, that comes with self-awareness, is like understanding also what your own perspectives are about that uncertainty and what's your team's perspective about that uncertainty, and being very intentional about the perspective that you hold. So like, for example, if you were a team, I mean, like many organizations right now, there's like the CEO or CMO like wants you to put some AI on it, right? Everybody wants AI.
Yeah.
And you reflected yourself and realized you actually, rather than being just sort of super excited about it and wanting to run with it, you actually recognize that I actually have some resistance to this. I'm concerned about what it's going to mean in terms of like, is this ultimately going to mean I'm going to have to lay a bunch of people off, right? Because we create efficiencies, et cetera. And you recognize like, what is my perspective about change? And then the reason that matters is because the way that you view change shapes how you navigate it.
Mm.
So it shapes whether you see it as an opportunity or an obstacle, for
Yeah.
example, right? And so there's work that I often do with my clients around seeing what your perspective is and then working on shifting it to something that serves you better.
Right.
So, for example, another way of thinking about AI is like maybe it'll help my team become wildly creative and strategic. Maybe we can uh, use it. I'm thinking about application of AI in terms of like how an organization operates, right? Their processes, new tools, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Maybe we can use it to help us all operate more strategically, right? And anyways, but you get the idea that
Yeah.
inside of leadership is really about like knowing who you are, being very intentional about who you are, and making sure that your actions match it. And
Interesting.
then, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, do you think, you know, and maybe this is another question, but I was going to say, do you think sometimes leaders, when they're reporting to the CEO, if they push back too much, or they're resistant to change, do you think sometimes they think that could be seen as a weakness? And I don't know, like, what's your thoughts around that?
You mean if the pushing back person would
Yeah,
be
yeah.
um, well, I mean that's a whole other I think it's really important when you have a directive and oftentimes it's like make it AI. What does that mean? So I think there's a few things to think about there. So first of all, um, I think you want to pause and think about who is the person that is making the request and what do you know about them?
Mhm.
What makes them tick? What are their goals? What do you know about their the kind of communication that resonates for them? Like, are they a very data driven person? Or are they like a big picture, creative thinking kind of person? Or are they going to be really focused on like process or human impact? Like, the people value different things. So I think, taking stock of like, who are they and what's their love language so that you can have a conversation that's going to resonate. And then the second thing is really clarifying what is it that they are actually asking for, because they often have, something there's some kind of motivation behind it. And they also might not understand how their request like translates into execution. Like, what does it
Yeah.
actually mean to do
Hmm.
that? And so vague requests need clear boundaries. So, one thing I recommend is just like asking a lot of questions around what problems are they thinking that this will solve? What business outcomes does it support? I know there was in one of the roundtables that I did with you all, there was a product leader who's shared that in their organization, they have a start with why one pager that any request, no matter where it comes from, has to be filled out so that it forces people to really think through the why behind what they're asking for. But I also think, in particular with AI, we want to be really careful about the hype.
Yeah.
Right? Like, just doing something because it's popular isn't necessarily going to serve your business or your customers. And I think staying really centered on like business goals and customer needs is
Hmm.
incredibly important in this era where there's all these flashy new things, right? Because you can spend a lot of calories and money, right, on shiny, the new shiny, and it actually isn't serving your business well. So I think, could it be seen as weakness? I hope not. I hope that, if you understand sort of the psyche of whoever's making the request and you know how to have a good conversation with them, you should be able to ask good questions that help them arrive at, if it isn't a good idea, the realization that it's actually not connected to business goals or not connected to customer needs. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
I think another way to think about it is it actually can make you come across as more strategic. If you just do what people ask you to do, you will never be seen as strategic. I mean, you want to always be asking good questions that help people and yourself and your team think about, where does this fit in the bigger picture, and is this really where we should invest our time? I mean, even maybe the answer is not like don't do it. Maybe it's like, The right answer is thinking about the scale at which we do it. We start with a smaller experiment that's controlled. Like I remember, you remember in the chief innovation dinner that we
Mm.
did, this idea of speedboats came up,
Yes, that was
right?
so
Of
good.
like, teams that go out and experiment with a new technology and they come back and share what they find. That's a way of being able to explore something new, but in a strategic way,
Hmm.
right? So I hear you. I mean, I think everybody, it's very natural to be nervous about pushing back on
Mm.
people that are more senior than you. But I like to encourage people to think of themselves, to hold sort of a consultant mindset.
Mm.
Like we're partners and I'm here to help,
Yeah.
right? Not
Mm.
you're my boss. And I mean, even with your boss, it should be a partnership,
Yeah.
right? Everybody
Yeah.
has their play. I don't view more executive as necessarily more valuable. We're all important. It's a team.
Mm.
Um, but
Interesting.
sometimes you have to work on your own, mindset around that too.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that. And what I'd love to know then off the back of that is what would you say to leaders stuck in survival mode then? So when everything feels uncertain and it's overwhelming, how can they reconnect to the purpose and inspire the team?
Yes. Um, I would bet that we both know a lot of leaders that feel stuck in survival mode right now. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. Um, well, there are a few things. I mean, first of all, if you really feel like you're in survival mode, the one of the first things I would suggest is looking at how you're managing your energy. So, energy management is an incredibly important skill set for leaders. I think it is underrated. I know personally way too many leaders that have chronic health conditions now because of extreme times of stress, um, both because of the environments that they were in and possibly because of their own energy management practices. So, when I say energy management, I mean a lot of things, everything from are you getting enough sleep? How are you eating? Are you exercising? Are you being like connecting with family and friends? Do you have good boundaries? Are you saying no to things? How are you prioritized? There's a bunch in there, right? But the reason I bring that up is because we know from the research that when people are exhausted, they make terrible decisions because you make the easiest decision.
Hmm.
So, and the other thing I would say about energy management is it is very difficult to manage, to have good, healthy energy management practices if you see it as something that you have to tackle all by yourself. So, if you are a leader, one thing I would highly recommend is actually having conversations with your whole leadership team
Hmm.
about your collective energy management practices and see if there are ways that you can work together to create some new boundaries or changes in the way that you all work that creates a certain kind of culture, right? Like you can create burnout culture together, or you can be like, wow, look, we're going the wrong direction. Let's start instituting boundaries around when people can send Slack messages, right? Like not in off working hours, or we need to do some work on how we're prioritizing work and say no to some things, or we need to empower our direct reports to feel like they can make decisions about what is a priority more so that we're not a bottleneck and we're just drowning in trying to help all these people figure that out. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a number of ways to do it, but so energy management would be one.
Yeah.
If you're stuck in survival mode, also something that can be revitalizing is revisiting your why, like your purpose as a leader, but also your team's purpose. Like, what is your mission? What is it that you all set out to do? And helping yourself and your team reconnect with that. Because when people are clear about their why and their purpose, their motivation skyrockets. Um, and then another thing I would say is just check whether you are seeing leadership as a team sport, whether you are approaching it as a team sport, or are you trying to do it all on your own? I gave you the example of my experience in the pandemic. One thing I wish in retrospect is that I had leaned on my boss and my leadership peers more.
Yeah.
I actually felt very isolated. And I think that if I had leaned on them more, I may have been able to navigate that even better. I'm sure that I would have, right? Because it's more brains on it. So, are you empowering your team to help you solve whatever's challenging, or are you trying to solve it all by yourself? And then the last piece I would say is, and it's something I was talking about earlier, is check your perspective.
Mm.
So with even the most daunting and challenging of situations have something to offer, right? So, my experience in the pandemic where we suddenly had to shift gears, one thing it did do for us is it pushed us to start really working on our remote learning approach,
Yeah.
right? Which was something I'd really wanted to do anyways. But I think, there's a phrase that I love, which is, make change happen for you, not to you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really think about that, what that means is saying, okay, I'm exhausted. There's so much, there's layoffs, reorgs, whatever. How can I look at this in a way that will be that's positive and forward, even the worst case scenario? Like how can I make this be something that will serve me and my team or the organization in some way as we move forward? So, and then also just check, the big thing is like, are you doing too much?
Yeah.
And do you need to say no?
Yeah.
So it depends on the context, but that's a lot of stuff for people to noodle on.
Yeah, exactly, and so relevant right now. And Teresa, you obviously work a lot with cross-functional teams as well. And I know obviously it was design, but you also work with design, product engineering, and even beyond that. But what do you think is the one common mistake you see with those teams when they try to lead through change together? I know you were mentioned earlier about survival mode, leaning on your peers, leaning on, other leaders in the business. But what do you see when they're working together, trying to lead through change? What really helps shift the dynamic?
Well, one thing that's really common is that and some there's some change or new initiative that's at play, and there's some kind of kickoff of like, okay, this is what we're gonna tackle together. And there's a lot of focus on, what are the goals of the project, what are the deliverables, the deadlines, and there's not enough emphasis on understanding what makes each other tick as human beings, and the similarities and differences, for example, between design, product, engineering, like what's driving our engineering partners, like what do they want to get out of this project or this initiative, what in their minds is like the most important thing to be focused on, and what's going to keep them up at night if we are doing it, like just understanding a lot more about each other as people, is one thing that I think is there's just not enough investment in that. It's kind of like, it reminds me of school, where we were thrown into group projects with 4 random people and we didn't like half of them, and some of them were slackers, and then you're like muddling through like, how do we make a thing together? It's no different in the work world. So if you don't invest some time in understanding each other as people, you will pay for it later. And especially when you run into challenges in the initiative, which all initiatives have, all projects have, you won't really support each other in the way that you could, if you had built those connections.
Yeah.
I mean, I also think that's an effort to help you really operate as a true team, as opposed to a collection of people that are put on an initiative together. I actually do, I have a workshop that I do with cross-functional teams, called Optimizing Cross-Functional Outcomes. That's literally helping them do that, like get to know each other as people, and then actually co-create how they're going to work together in light of what they understand about, what makes each other tick.
And actually, you did a great session. We wanted to make it product design and engineering, but it ended up just being product and design. And you interviewed product, and you interviewed design, and it was really interesting to hear the misconceptions of what each other thought, the other one thought. It was so interesting. So I think actually getting to know, and I think you were saying like understand their job, so they know where so you know where they're coming from, and actually then they can lead much better together in a collaborative way.
Yeah. And what happened in that session, which happens a lot, is in the process of learning, interviewing and learning more about them, they synthesize like, what's all the stuff we learned about our product folks and what's all the stuff we learned about design folks. They came to the conclusion that there actually were a ton more similarities than they were giving credit for.
Yeah.
And that was connecting, which you can imagine on a team, like realizing, oh, maybe we're not so much on opposite sides of the fence as we were thinking is really powerful. But sometimes there are real differences, and it's important to understand those differences.
Yeah, 100%. And let's talk about resistance now. What's worked for you in turning resistors into contributors?
Resistors into contributors or contributors.
As I say in English, contributors.
Yeah, contributors. Well, it makes me think of a experience I had with my team at Cooper where we were working on like redesigning our a course or multiple courses. I can't remember, but what I do remember is I asked them to cut some of the content and make things more focused. Mm-hmm. And they really didn't like that. I mean, one thing, if you've ever designed curriculum or learning experiences, like it is so hard to kill your darlings. There are so many things that you want to share with people and you only have so much time. So it's really difficult. But there was a lot of resistance to what I was asking for. And I actually was nervous about going into this meeting with them. We were going to talk about it. And I thought, right before I went in, I was like, you know what? I am damn lucky because they're really resisting because they care a lot about the quality of the work that we do and the impact on the students, right? And so I went in and I decided to just start with that to like name, I know that I don't remember exactly how I said it, but it basically was like, I know we have different perspectives about what we should do, but I want you to know that I know that you're coming from a good place. I know that you care a lot about the work and our mission, and that is where you're coming from. Mm-hmm. And I cannot tell you, like, the energy in the room, it was like a big collective sigh. It's like the temperature dropped down just because I was acknowledging, one, that like in a way it's championing them, right? It's like you're trying to be great at your job and you care about your job. And I really appreciate that. But it also just sort of like named it was like a human moment. And then that allowed us to have a more, a better conversation about what we would do next. So, when I think about resistance, one thing that can be really powerful is just starting with empathy. Like they're a human. Yeah. They really care, or maybe they got stuff going on in their life. I don't know. It depends on the situation, but connecting on a human level first. The other thing, and this actually came up in the Chief Innovation Dinner that we did. I think it's really useful to think about not all resistors are bad. So when you think about big change, let's say AI, there's going to be multiple relationships to that change represented in your team. There will be people that are totally on board for it. They're like, yes, let's, whatever's cutting edge, I'm on it. There will be people that are not a no, but they're risk averse. So they want a lot of information before they feel comfortable really like running with it. There will be people that are just purely skeptical, and then people that are not just skeptical, but like completely resistant, right? So it can be useful, one, to recognize like that there is a gamut of human relationships to change happening here. And to acknowledge that, like that's human. I'm thinking of there's a team that I worked with where basically two teams merged. And there were people that were really happy about those changes and what that meant for them. There were people that were very like concerned about, is this going to be a good thing or bad thing? There had been some layoffs too. So there were people that were skeptical and really upset. And when we did work session together, early on, I just acknowledged it.
Mm.
Some of you are really excited about this. Some of you lost people that you really care about that were on your team and you're bummed. Some of you don't think this is a good thing. That's okay. Like, you're human beings and changes are happening. But then what we did is we worked on, we did this exercise I like to do called a coat of arms, where they co-created, like if we were our new team, the team that we're moving into becoming, because we can't be who we were anymore. Now we're two teams together. We're going to be something else. Who do we want to be in that change? Like how do we want to be seen? How do we want to work together? And so they created these coats of arms, and it was just a really empowering experience for them to be a part of thinking about who they're going to be next. So, I disarm them with, this is normal to feel lots of different ways. We are moving forward. Here's your invitation to be a part of crafting who we're going to be next. I think all of those are really important when it comes to resistance.
Yeah.
The goal is actually to inspire people, right? In toward change, not just resist it, but that takes time. It takes time.
Yeah. And you recently said that layoff is temporary. Your leadership reputation is permanent. How do you support leaders who are navigating layoffs or hard transitions without losing their humanity?
Yes, and layoffs are definitely something that happen. It's where you earn your leadership stripes, I think. So layoff is temporary. Your leadership reputation is permanent. So what I meant by that was you want to think about how people will remember you. And so how do you go through something you may not even want what's happening? How do you navigate a layoff in a way that is grounded in your values and your mission, and where you don't lose your humanity? So I think one of the first things to keep in mind about that is it's not black or white. I have a lot of leaders when I work with them around something like this would be like, basically, is it actually possible for me to feel terrible about this whole situation, but navigate it in a way that I feel proud of? And the answer is yes. Like, all of these things can happen at the same time. You can make really necessary business decisions while genuinely caring about impacted people. You can feel proud of your leadership through a layoff while also feeling really sad about it. You can be both decisive and really compassionate. Americans in particular have a very black and white way of looking at things, but all of those things can exist together. So, embrace the complexity of it. And the big thing is just really being intentional about your approach. So defining yourself, and also perhaps with the other leaders that are involved in the layoffs, or your boss, who do you want to be through this transition? So what kind of leader do you want to be remembered as during this time? And how can you balance necessary business decisions with genuine compassion? Even just the act of having that conversation with others before you just dive into the process and mechanics will change how you approach those processes and mechanics. And then another thing that you can do is actually define your operating principles through that change with your other leaders. So, how are we going to behave? How are we going to communicate? How are we going to think as we move through this together? Because usually in many cases, there's multiple layoffs, right? And there's multiple people that have to have those conversations. And then the last thing I would say is going back to that phrase that I said before, which is like, make the change work for you, not to you, right? So reflect on together, like, how can we use this to strengthen our team? And what are possible opportunities that might emerge through this difficult transition? So the way that you think about it is really important, because it models for other people how they should think about it as well.
Yeah, it's so relevant, and it has been for the past 2.5 years. Like, I've never known a market with so many layoffs. And do you know what? I think there'll be lots of people out there that would probably want to talk further around that point, Teresa. However, we only have chance for one more question. Sorry, time for one more question. And it's a good one. So, if you could hand every leader one mindset shift to help them lead better through change, what would it be and why?
Your perspective is power.
Mhm.
So own your perspective and help people do the same. And it goes back to the, I mean, I can't say enough. The way that we look at things affects what happens next. And that's not like a woo-woo California, like,
Mhm.
oh, just with like mind power, I like make things happen in a very practical, tangible way. You know, it affects, like I said before, whether you see something as an opportunity or an obstacle. It affects whether you even recognize opportunities around you. It affects energetically how you show up to conversations. Um, it affects how you engage. It affects the decisions that you end up making. So, the more you can build the muscle around checking in with yourself and with your team about what perspective are we holding about what's going on, and then what perspective would serve us best or myself best, and then what are specific actions that I or we could take to help us move toward that perspective. It's a game changer.
Mhm.
Like, and yeah, I just think, leaders who are really effective, whether they are aware of it or not, are often pretty good at this skill set of awareness and management of perspective.
Love that. Love that. And everything you just said has been incredible. Thank you so much. Sadly, we've run out of time for more questions. But I'm hoping that we're going to be working together in October in New York. So everyone, watch this space and keep an eye out. But most importantly, if someone wants to reach out to you for coaching, leadership tips, where can they reach you? How can they find you?
Yeah. I would love to hear from anyone who wants to reach out. You want to talk about leadership? It's like my favorite topic. So, and I would love to see if I can help if you need help. A few ways. So one is our website, brazenleadershipdevelopment.com. My email address, people can ping me directly, Teresa at brazenld.com. And also, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I share a lot of resources and tools and tips there. So do not be shy about making a connection request. Um, and yeah, just come find me.
Love that. Thank you so much, Teresa. And I'm so glad we got to do this. Thank you so much for your time and sharing all your amazing insights. Until next time, thank you so much to Teresa and to our listeners. We'll see you for the next episode of TDA Talks. Thank you.
Thank you.